The road to World War III began in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait and was defeated by the United States and their allies. After the First Persian Gulf War, the United Nations placed economic and military sanctions on Iraq, which included regular inspections of military installations and other programs involving mass weapons. In 2002, years of Iraq not complying with the sanctions, the United Nations signed a bill to try and force Saddam Hussein to allow inspectors back into the country, but Saddam Hussein denied the inspectors access. In March of 2003, Saddam Hussein continued his habit of hindering the United Nations inspections to ensure that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction. This, paired with intelligence that Saddam was working with Al-Qaeda, sparked the United States into action. The United States warned Saddam Hussein to leave the country within 48 hours on March 17th. On the third day, Saddam had not left. The U.S. began dropping bombs on military bases and government buildings, followed not long after by a full-scale invasion. The United States and Britain occupied Iraq until 2011, when the last of the transitional forces were pulled out. A war-torn country is not the only thing that was left behind in Iraq. A whole new brand of terrorists was born, calling themselves the Islamic State of Iraq. This was the Iraqi branch of al-Qaeda, which was largely under the leadership of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, until he was killed in 2006 by a U.S. bomb, which is when they rebranded. We will get back to ISI. The next major event on the road to World War III occurred in Syria in 2011. Syrian civilians began peacefully protesting the oppressive government and President Assad's regime. Assad, not willing to deal with the protests in his country, began murdering protesters. A rebel group is born in Syria calling themselves the Free Syrian Army and begins to fight the Syrian government. The same year, the Kurds in Syria take up independence and no longer recognize Assad or the Syrian government as theirs. By 2012, Iran, Russia, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and Turkey joined the Syrian war, some just in support with weapons and gear, some with men on the ground, and all on varying sides. Remember that radical Al-Qaeda group from Iraq calling themselves the Islamic State of Iraq? Well, they began to march into Syria calling themselves the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria and attacked both the rebels that opposed Assad and the Kurds who freed themselves from Assad. After ISIS's invasion of Syria, the Pentagon starts to train and fund the Free Syrian Army to fight ISIS, but not if they are still fighting Assad. As ISIS is fighting the Kurds in Syria, Turkey begins to bomb the Kurds in Turkey and in Syria, but doesn't bomb ISIS, which furthers confusion about the war in Syria. Russia decides to fully intervene in 2015 by attacking the rebels who oppose Assad and then begin to bomb the ISIS oil operations in an attempt to cut their supply of cash off. This all brings us to November 2015. Just last month, two very important worldly political events happened. ISIS committed atrocious terror attacks throughout London, killing hundreds, bringing France into the war against ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The second event was perhaps even more important. A Russian fighter jet was flying in Syrian airspace near the border of Turkey, or was it flying in Turkish airspace on the border of Syria? Well, that doesn't seem to be all that important anyways, because the Turks sent two American-made F-16 fighter jets to shoot down the Russian fighter jet. They allegedly issued warnings to evacuate the airspace. When the Russian fighter jet did not comply, the two Turkish fighter jets shot down the Russian fighter jet, killing one of the pilots and really pissing off Russian President Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin was quoted as saying Turkey will regret shooting down the fighter jet and immediately placed economic sanctions on Turkey, including canceling plans for a gas pipeline from Russia. He then went on to accuse Turkey of buying oil directly from ISIS in secret and laid out what he says is evidence that they are doing so. At this point, nobody knows what's going to happen, but tensions are high in the world, and with the United States and Russia becoming so heavily involved in the Middle East, it leaves everyone wondering what the tipping point for the next world war is going to be.